What's up, guys? Chris here again. We are in step 3 of our ear training piece here on our blog. I'm so excited that you decided to join me today and what we're going to be talking about. So if you remember back to steps 1 and step 2, step 1 was being able to hum along with a major scale, whether it's C or G or whatever you want to pick that fits your voice, being able to do that with and without the instrument. And then step 2 was beginning to identify the low end. Okay, so I hope as you started going through maybe your favorite song, worship or modern song, that you were able to start identifying the lowest pitch being played on either the piano or whatever instruments were being played, whether it's bass guitar, guitar, acoustic guitar, electric, whatever you were listening to, whatever instrument was involved in the song. I hope that made a lot of sense for you, and I hope you started being able to do that. If you've come from a background of really listening to melody and to harmony parts mainly, that's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to do, simply because your ear has been trained to hear the melody and the harmony parts, like a lead line in a guitar, or the melody in a piano, or the melody sung by the vocal. If you're a vocalist, that's a little bit tougher to do. If you're a lead guitar player, that's sometimes harder to do. But when you're a bass player and a drummer, you're kind of tuned in to some of the low-end aspects and the rhythmic aspects, which is more where the bass guitar and the bass of any song lies, okay? So that's what I wanted you to identify last week. So if you're still working through that, feel free to still check out step 3 today, what we're talking about, but still keep working as you're listening to music, just trying to identify the low end, try and match those pitches, because what that's gonna do for you is just completely allow you to know the foundation of the song and know what chord is being played, or at least know what pitch is being played, be able to match that. Because that leads us right into what we're talking about today, which is identifying the exact chord. Now, this is where things get amazing. So, with today's information, you're going to be able to start trying to listen to a song, whether it's on the radio, something somebody plays for you randomly. Maybe you're hearing a song at church. And you're like, man, this is a really cool song. I would love to be able to play it. Well, what if you could just sit in church and listen to a song and just lock those chords in your mind, go home and start playing it? I mean, that would be incredible, right? And that's totally possible. That's what we're doing here with all these steps here to the puzzle of ear training, okay? And so locking in what the chord is and understanding what exact chord is being played is what we're going to be doing and talking about today. Now, I will tell you this is a little bit of a trial and error kind of experience, okay? Whenever I teach my students to do this, there's definitely a little bit of give and take there, okay? Students may think the certain chord is 1 when it really is like a 4 chord, or maybe they're thinking a 6 chord is the chord being played, but it's actually a 3 chord, okay? There is a lot of like trial and error activity that has to be done whenever you're doing this initially. But over time, what happens is you start being able to immediately identify a chord's number based on hearing it. It's incredible. And that's what happened for me. When I was in high school, I started practicing doing this. It started making more sense, and I was able to start identifying chords and pitches immediately. And that's what I've taught some of my students to do as well. They've been able to start listening to songs, becoming fully self-reliant and self-sufficient to be able to learn any song they want to just by listening to it and not even having an instrument in front of them. That's the game changer right there. That is the total game changer. And then the more that you understand keys of music as it relates to piano or guitar, you can then transpose the music immediately. So if someone was asking you to learn a song in the car on the way over to church and the original was in C, but you needed to play the song with your church group in E flat, you could do that given your knowledge of the scales and the natural numbers and all that good stuff. So this is a huge piece of music that is so practical for any musician looking to play any style of music. It really doesn't matter. It's not just worship. This involves pop music. This is every style of music right here, because it's just music in general. Being able to do this is a huge benefit to any musician. So that's why I'm so excited to talk about it. I love it. It's meant so much to me as a musician myself, and it's meant so much to our students who've learned to do this. So let's jump right in. So what we're talking about today is identifying the chord number when you hear a chord, okay? So what I want to first do is kind of set out and give you some of the properties of the different chords that you'll hear in a given song, okay? So we have our major chords, which are the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. And every single key, we have a nice little template as far as how the chords work, okay? Major chords are always the 1 chord, the 4, and the 5 chord, okay? So in the key of G, if you're going to play a G chord, which I'll just kind of illustrate that for you here. If we're in the key of G and we're going to play a G, that would be the 1 chord. That's a major chord. If we're in the key of C and we're going to play a 1 chord, that would be a C major chord. right here, okay? Those sound happy. Those are happy chords, okay? So if we're going to stay in the key of G, we'll play G as our 1, C would be our 4, and D would be our 5. Those are all happy chords, okay? If we were going to play our minor chords are 2s, 3s, and 6s. So our 2 chord would be an A minor, okay? A 3 chord would be a B minor, and our 6 chord would be an E minor. Okay, and you can all kind of tell how those sound a little bit more minor sounding. The 7 is called a diminished chord. I don't really want to talk as much about that because it's just not that common. You don't hear a lot of diminished chords in worship music or in pop music in general. You'll hear some in some Christmas music. Which is typically when you get to hear some really cool chords and some really cool, even key changes within songs. It's really awesome. But as far as practical, modern worship music goes, you're not going to hear a ton of diminished chords, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But the diminished chord is always the 7 chord in any given key. So what we're going to do is focus on chords 1 through 6, okay? So major and minor, that's what we're focusing on today, major chords and minor chords. Okay, so whenever we listen to the chords in the music, that's kind of the first thing that we're identifying after we try and identify the pitch. So like we showed in Reckless Love a couple weeks back, I was trying to identify the pitch of the lead line in that song Reckless Love, and I was showing you how I was identifying that with the bass note there. So whenever we're in the key of F sharp, the bass starts on the 6. I was singing the lead line, I'm playing the bass line, so we'd want to hum. Okay, so we know that here to here is 1 step apart. We know here to here is 1 step apart, and here to here is 3 steps apart from a 4 to a 1, okay? Now, you may know how many steps apart those notes are, but you may not know exactly which chord starts on what number, right? So if we were starting on a 6, but you didn't know that we were starting on a 6, you just knew, okay, the first chord is 1 whole step higher than the second chord because we go back a whole step to get to that second chord. That helps, but you don't know what chord we're starting on, so you have really no frame of reference for what we're doing. You could think, okay, maybe we're starting on a 2, maybe we're starting on a 4, maybe we're starting on a 1. And if you don't know what chord you're starting out on, that makes it really difficult to then know what chords are being played. You got the intervals, you got the pitches right, but you don't know what the chords are. And this is where today's lesson really comes in big. So to be able to know that first chord, yeah, that one's a 6. I know that's a 6 because I've heard it before and I can attribute it to a 6's property, basically. Okay, that's what we're trying to get at today. So whenever you're listening to a sequence of chords, like in an intro or a verse, you really want to mark out and try and find if there's a 1 chord present in that progression. Okay, a lot of times there is. A lot of times in any progression, whether it's an intro or a verse, there is a 1 chord. Now that doesn't happen all the time. It just happens especially in choruses and intros. Because the 1 chord kind of establishes the key of the song, right? The 1 chord is the root note of the key that the song is in. If the song is in the key of G, then the 1 chord would be a G major chord, and the bass would be playing a G. And so at some point, you want to establish that root chord and that root note there, okay? And so if you don't ever hear a 1 chord in the intro, maybe scrub to the verse and see if you hear a 1 chord there. If you don't hear a 1 chord in the verse, maybe go to the pre-chorus and the chorus, and just go in the song until you can find a 1 chord or until you think you find a 1 chord, because then that gives you your frame of reference for what every other pitch is. You now know what your root note is, and you now know which scale to hum, right? So now finding the intervals, which you've already done, it allows you to then match those intervals to specific notes in that scale, which then allows you to know what chord you're playing. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find where the 1 chord is, okay? And so identifying the 1 chord is really as simple as identifying the chord with the most resolution to it, okay? So if I'm playing a progression, I'm going from E minor to D, C, to G. So I'm going to go 6, 5, 4, 1, 6, 5, 4. Okay, so what we're trying to look for is the most resolute chord, the chord with the most resolution. That makes you feel like, okay, we could be done after that particular chord. When when I play this one, it doesn't make me feel like we're done yet. It doesn't make me feel like, okay, we could end on that chord and I feel good about that, okay? The 6th chord isn't gonna make you feel like that because it's a minor chord. Any minor chord isn't gonna make you feel resolved. It's gonna make you feel like, okay, there's still a little bit of tension there, we need to go somewhere else and end it somewhere else. The D is a major chord, but it doesn't have as much resolution or resolvement as the 1 chord does, okay? Going from a 6, just kind of leaves you hanging. You're like waiting for something else to play after the 5, and that's how you know that is not a 1 chord, okay? A 1 chord has much more resolution than that. So 6, we know that's not a 1. 5, we know that's not a 1. Here's a 4. Now, a lot of times in this chord particularly is out of tune a little bit, so bear with me on that one. But the 4 chord feels resolved a lot like the 1 chord does, but not quite as much as the 1 chord does. The 1 chord always makes you feel like you could end on that one. A lot of songs do end on the 4, and so that's why you could probably think, okay, that does feel resolved. I feel like I could end there. A lot of times people get tripped up between the 1 and the 4 chords, and it's a common thing because the 4 definitely has some resolution to it, but you want to really focus on, okay, what is the chord that I just know is the one that I just know I could end on, and that's the end of the song? Like, I feel like that ends the progression really well. 6, 5, 4, 1. That makes you feel like, okay, we can end right there and we're done. That's the 1 chord. The 1 chord feels resolved. It feels like you could be done with the progression now, and there's not anything that I want to hear after that. There's nothing. Like with the 6th chord, it just doesn't feel like that's it. Even if we did another progression, we did 1, 4, 5, 6. It kind of still makes you feel like you want to go somewhere else because it's a minor chord. There's no resolution there. The 5, same thing. There's not any resolution there. It makes you feel like you want to hear something else. Again, the 4 and the 1 are going to be the most common ones that you can make a mistake on as far as the major chords go, but really listen for that chord that sounds more resolved because the 1 is going to be it, okay? So we got our major chords, we got our 1, 4, and 5 chords, and the most resolved chord is going to be your 1 chord. So if you can find that, within the pitches that you're humming along with, the bass pitches that you're humming along with, that produces the scale with which you can then define the other notes that you've hummed before with, basically, right? So if you know what the 1 is, then you just hum through the scale until you find the pitches that you're hearing in the verse and the intro sections, and you instantly know then what numbers those are as you go through, okay? So as I described earlier, though, the 5 chord isn't very resolved, okay? The 4 chord is much more resolved than the 5 chord if you're trying to end on it. And so again, the 1 and the 4 will sound a little bit like the 5, definitely makes you feel like it kind of leaves you hanging. The other chords, the minor chords, the 2s, the 3s, and the 6s, those are going to feel like a little bit more sad chords, okay? A 2 chord, a 3, and a 6 in the key of G would be an A minor, B minor, E minor. Those are going to feel more sad in nature, and they're definitely not going to feel resolved. And so you're going to know generally a minor chord when you hear it, and you'll know a major chord when you hear it, because there will be that feeling the more that you do this, either happy or sad based on what chords you're hearing, okay? And so really, once you get into this, it's a lot of trial and error. You might think, okay, I think that chord that I'm hearing right here is the 4 chord, okay? So then you kind of go through your knowledge of what you know about the intervals. In that song, Reckless Love, let's say we thought that the first pitch we were hearing was a 4 chord, okay? Let's just say we didn't even hear that it was minor. We thought it was a 4 chord. We thought it was major instead of a 6 chord. The progression in Reckless Love goes 6, 5, 4, 1. But let's say we thought it was a 4 chord at the beginning instead of the 6. Then if we go back a whole step, we would need to have a 3 next, because going from a 6 to a 5, we know we're just going back 1 note in the scale. 6 to 5 is a whole step, and that sounds very different than 4 to 3. 4 to 3 is actually a half step. So the more that you kind of get your head around this knowledge of like, okay, I know that I'm hearing a whole step difference as opposed to a half step. Whole step sounds like this. Da-da. Half step is da-da, da-da. A little bit closer together, right? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Difference between whole step and half step. If you were if you were starting with an incorrect chord, you could kind of go through your progression in the intervals that you've already mapped out per our step 2 blog video, and start kind of doing a little bit of trial and error based on what you already think you know, okay? If you know that you're going from a whole whatever chord you're starting with, and you're going back a whole step, and you're saying, okay, well, I'm starting with a 4, so the next note has to be a 3. Well, a 4 and a 3 are only a half step separated. And so you would know right then, okay, this can't be a 4 chord that we're starting on. It's got to be like maybe a 2 or maybe a 3 chord that we're starting with, because if you go back, you have to go back a whole step to get to the next note in this scale. And so all this information, as you get into it, it can definitely seem tricky at the outset because there's so much to it, and there's a lot of trial and error, as I keep saying. But the more that you do it, and the more that you hum the scale, the more that you identify the pitches, the more that you know the properties of the chords and how they work, the more that you're going to be able to do this, and you'll find that it makes so much more sense. It really does take practice. I can't stress that enough. As I told you back in the first video, I practiced a ton when I was in high school and college to be able to do this stuff. And I just kept getting better and better. It's taken me, several months to teach our students to be able to do that. It's a process, and it's training your ear. It really is what the title is, ear training. It's training your ear to be able to hear these pitches and be confident about what you're hearing. And so it does take time. Don't get discouraged if you feel like you can't do this. But the main thing I want you to take away from today is being able to identify what chord is the one chord. That's what you want to do in the sequence of pitches and the sequence of chords that you're hearing. You identify whether or not you're hearing major chords or minor chords, and then you're identifying where is the most resolved chord. And then from there, you determine the numbers based on that one resolved chord. And you can do that. You can listen to a progression, determine the one, and then determine the other numbers based on that one pitch. I've seen students do it all the time. You just have to be able to identify. You have to have a marker. You have to have a base from with which to go. If everything is relative, you never quite know what's what, but as long as you establish something as something that you know, I know this is a one chord, then I can go from there, then everything else will make a whole lot of sense. So as you practice this week, I want you to try to start identifying the one chords in songs. Maybe after you've tried to identify it, maybe go back and look at like a chord chart that's available that you can just search on Google for a chord chart of Reckless Love or whatever song you're listening to, and say, okay, I thought this chord was the one, so let me go back and see if I'm right. Okay, if we're in the key of F sharp and the chord that I'm hearing, okay, I thought this one was the one. Nope, that one's actually a B, so that was actually the 4 chord that I was hearing and thinking it was the one. Kind of go back and test yourself, and then just keep practicing. Practice this every week in some form or fashion, and you don't even have to set aside time to do this. You can just listen to music and practice this. That's the beauty of this. It's so practical. It's every day. The more that you listen to music and the more that you practice this, the more it's just going to become innate, where you can start doing it. But I do know that it will be a challenge, and I can understand that completely. So as you get into it, feel free to reach out with any questions you have. I'd love for you to email me at chris@rootedmusiconline.com, or you can even access us on our chat widget and our website. All of our websites have them. And if you just have a question about what you need to do or how you need to go about doing this, or you're even saying, hey, I'm listening to this song, am I right? I'd love to just hear your thoughts on what you're listening to and just give you some quick feedback. This is something I really am passionate about, and I really love teaching students how to do. So I'd be happy to take some time out of my day just to give you a little bit of feedback and help you through it. So I hope you enjoyed today. I'm really looking forward to step 4 next week, which is really going to be putting all the pieces together. We're going to kind of take everything that we've learned and start putting it together by incorporating it into your specific instrument. Okay? So I hope you've enjoyed today. Let me know if you have any questions. See you next week.